I was born and raised in a small coal mining town, very poverty-stricken, but very proud people, very fine people. And the mountains around my home became my mentors as far as my development and my love and passion for nature. Photography would come later, and it was sort of an addition to my passion for birds and ecology. And I remember my mom giving to me my dad's old cameras, which was an old Kodak, I think it was a Kodak dual flex camera where you had to look down and everything was upside down. And every picture I took, of course, was an award winner in my eyes, but most of the robins I took when the picture came out, they were very small. Well, my mom was born and raised in West Virginia. She's 86 years old, and she's always been what I've called my rock. She's always been there. And even when I was a youngster, she saw something in me as far as my love for nature. And she bought my first pair of binoculars, my first bird book. And she was like that with all the kids. If there was something that was of interest to them, she would nurture that, encourage, motivate us, and challenge us. And my mother even gave me some property that was outside of our yard. We called it the wilderness. And it was only about 2 acres of shrubby growth that was out there. But she said, "Jim, take this and that'll be your wildlife refuge and you can do what you want with it." And I would oftentimes go out there by myself after school. And that's where I would learn about birds. I would lay down in an opening area and just watch the clouds float over and use my imagination to try to figure out what it was, what figure was passing by me. So she was a big influence. All through my life, she's always been there, and it's always been a joy to go back to war, 7 miles from Cucumber, and sit on the porch and talk about my experiences, whether it's from tagging grizzly bears or my latest photo journey through the state of West Virginia. My development as a nature photographer wouldn't start until after graduate school. I bought a camera primarily to help me to document the research I was doing on the different types of wildlife. I worked with grizzly bears in Alaska. I worked with the whooping crane in Texas, and the camera helped me record the different types of research or the surveys I was doing. The more I got into photography, the more people wanted to see it. They were not as interested in my stories about nature unless I was showing my images with it. And so all of a sudden I started getting this, I guess it's an addiction, where I would go outside, but I'd always have my camera with me. I could not go anywhere unless I had my camera and a lens and go photograph. And it got to the point where people started asking me to come and do shows for them on my nature photography. And that was about 26 years ago when it started. A lot of the good photographs I took early in my career I was very lucky to get them because I didn't understand f-stops or shutter speeds. But once people started saying they liked my photography and they wanted to see more of it, I started reading all I could about photography. I started watching programs about photographers. I have never taken a formal workshop or course in college or one of these night courses in photography. I have attended seminars, but a lot of mine was through trial and error. After I'd spent 6 years in Alaska, which is a phenomenal place to live and to photograph, I transferred down to a National Wildlife Refuge called Matagorda Island, located about 6 miles off the coast of Texas. Well, one day I was in Albuquerque attending a meeting with Fish and Wildlife Service, and during my flight back to Houston, before I got on the shuttle flight down to Victoria, Texas, I was handed a note that said my house exploded on the island. At that time, I was getting published, getting recognized for my work, not only my photography, but my writing. And the fire effectively destroyed everything I had except what was in my suitcase in Albuquerque. I lost 10,000 images, all from Alaska and Texas. I lost 7 manuscripts, everything I owned. I could have easily decided then and there that photography was fun, but I wasn't going to start over after doing 10,000 images. but there's such a fire in my heart for using photography to get people excited about nature. And so I had decided then and there that even though I'd lost everything in my photography, I would start over. And from the very beginning, I started with slide 1, went to slide 2, till this day, about 10 years later, I've got 75,000 images in my stock file. I am a typical West Virginia boy. When I was a teenager, I could not wait to leave this state. There wasn't much opportunity for me in what I wanted to do, so I left the state. About 11 years ago, my wife and I, we returned back to the East Coast. We came back to the East Coast to pursue our careers, and at that time I was becoming an established photographer. I got published. I was on a speaking circuit. And when you're out west, you have vast expanses of public lands that you can just park your car and get out of the car and just go and not worry about trespassing on somebody's property. And the photographic opportunities are tremendous. I wanted to find a place like that near where we live. And that place turned out to be the Allegheny Highlands of West Virginia. Not only is the Allegheny Highlands close to where I live, I can get there within a couple hours, but it's unique in its natural history. Glaciers never reached this far south, never reached into West Virginia, but the effects of glaciers did. And so in a lot of these remote mountainous areas of West Virginia, especially along the eastern ridges and the higher elevations, species such as red spruce, tundra cotton, or cotton grass as we call it, and other types of plants and animals became established on these higher mountain ridges and in these highland bogs. And once the glaciers receded and the climate started warming up, these species stayed. They decided, heck, it's kind of comfortable here in West Virginia. I don't want to migrate back up there. So we have some unique areas here in West Virginia that have a variety of plants and animals that are found nowhere else in the Appalachians. So the natural history is unique. We have 900,000 acres of public land called the Monongahela National Forest, which is near 20 major urban areas, including New York City, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. And these are places that people can come to and get away from it all. And that's how I discovered this place, is just coming over and taking a look at it. And I found that each season here in West Virginia, especially in the Highlands, is something of the marvelous. I've never had any formal training in photography or art, but I could instinctively start discovering scenes within a scene. You could give me a big landscape to look at, and I would just start analyzing that scene subconsciously, and I could pick out 3 or 4 different other parts of that scene that I could focus in and photograph. I know I've got the picture right if after I snap the shutter I smile. I know I've got the picture. And there's been a lot of photographs that I've waited. I couldn't wait to get the pictures back to see if actually it captured, if I conveyed what I had seen. But there are certain types of images that I take that you know are winners. There's one picture in the book of a sunrise reflecting off of the Williams River in Pocahontas County. And that was such a phenomenal moment for me that I was actually shaking. I was nervous because I didn't want to miss it. And it was just a gold reflection of the sun coming off the surface of the water. And I had about 2 minutes to photograph it. I knew I got it. I was pretty confident I had it. But you can be assured that for 2 weeks there before the film came back processed, I was a little nervous. So I have a couple of approaches. One is I just like to go out into the country roads, drive around, and when something catches my attention, I'll stop and photograph it. Other times I know there's certain things I need to photograph, like Seneca Rocks or sunrise at Dolly Sides. Those are the icons of West Virginia. Those are the types of scenes that people associate the mountain state with. Every day, every second that I'm in my home state of West Virginia and I'm photographing, it's a memorable moment. Whether I'm photographing in the Allegheny Highlands on Dolly Sides, or I'm at Berwyn Lake photographing a daisy, and that lake is only 4 miles from my mother's house. It is fantastic. I have a story that I have to tell you about. My mom used to tell me that mason jars were magical. And if you're from West Virginia, you know what mason jars are, those little glass containers. And of course you can put pickles in them and preserves. They're good for moonshine. Not that I know anything about that. But my mom, when I was a kid, she used to tell me they were magical. And if you ever had a moment that you wanted to keep as a memory, you get a mason jar and open it up and let the memory seep into the mason jar. And then you just screw the lid back on, put it off to the side. Years later, as you're an adult and times get tight, times get rough, just get that mason jar and unscrew the lid and let that memory seep back into your heart. Well, as a kid, I believed her. As a teenager, I thought she was crazy. But as an adult, I understood what she meant. And she was saying, gather as many memories as you can, because as you get older, that's what you live off of. And actually, when times are tight, you go back to those memories that cause a smile on your face. So every moment I have in West Virginia, every time I photograph, every time I take a group out to photograph West Virginia, it's a mason jar memory. But these days, just coming back into my home state and discovering something new about it, or seeing a new scene in a different light that just is fantastic, those are the memories it's worth capturing. So I've got tons of them, and I'd have to get all the mason jars that I have and unscrew them, and you'd see all the memories that I have for photographing. Just recently, a very funny situation happened when I was photographing in Canaan Valley State Park. Beautiful state park, nestled 3,200 feet up in elevation, highest mountain valley east of the Mississippi River. And I'm photographing a groundhog. I have been watching this groundhog for about 3 or 4 years. The groundhog would never let me get close to it. Finally, it would let me get close enough to get full-frame pictures. And one afternoon, I went back to photograph to revisit my friend. Most of these critters become my friends, they're buddies. And he's out in the meadow feeding, and just above him I see a deer. It's a yearling buck. It's got velvet, just one tine coming up on each side of the head. And the deer sees me, and I don't have my cameras ready because I'm just getting ready to set up to photograph the groundhog. And all of a sudden, the deer starts walking down the hill. Now you would think that the deer is watching me, but I could tell that the deer was looking at the groundhog. The groundhog had no idea the deer was coming, but I knew exactly what was going to happen, is the deer and the groundhog were going to touch noses. For some reason I knew that. I knew it was going to happen. I started shaking because I was thinking, what a golden opportunity. So I'm fumbling in my truck to try to get my 600mm lens set on the tripod. And just as I set the lens on the tripod, the deer walks down the hill and touches the nose of the groundhog. It's the most funniest scene you'd ever want to see. And within a split second, the groundhog decided to had enough of that and took off. I didn't take the picture, but I do have the picture of the groundhog just running behind the deer. And that's where photographing for me is it's not just the pictures, but it's the memories I capture. And that's one memory in my mason jar that I'll always remember. There's literally thousands of special, unique little places around the country, and the Allegheny Highlands of West Virginia is one of them, that you can get totally lost into nature. You have stunning vistas, you have sparkling waters, you have rushing waterfalls, and you have places to get away. And so when I'm doing a slideshow for an audience and I see a smile in the audience, I see a couple hug each other a little bit tighter because it brings back a memory, or I see a tear in somebody's eyes, I know that my photography is accomplishing what I'd set out to do. One thing I've also discovered here in the Allegheny Highlands is that slowly but surely the rest of the world is discovering this unique area. A lot of my photography friends, some of the well-known photographers in the world, are now coming to West Virginia to photograph. The Glade Creek Grist Mill at Babcock State Park, Seneca Rocks, Dolly Sod, Spruce Knob. They're coming here to get away from those areas that everybody else is going to, like the Great Smokies or Yellowstone. There are often times I can be on the Highland Scenic Highway photographing, and I won't see another vehicle for 20 minutes to an hour. And I can just walk off the side of the road and be in some beautiful forest land and photograph the fall colors. And a lot of folks associate the Allegheny Highlands with fall, the autumn season, but each season of the Highlands is something of the marvelous. It's like John Muir said, is when you tug at a single strand in nature, you find it attached to the rest of the world. One thing I like to emphasize in my photography, especially when I teach people to photograph, if they look at the images in my book, or if they look at some of the images that I've had published in the magazines, is the majority of those pictures they can take because they're either off of trails that are accessible to anyone, or they're just off the side of the road. A lot of folks seem to think that you have to backpack in 20 or 30 miles into a wilderness area to get the shots, but you don't have to. You certainly can, and you certainly will get different view perspectives and different angles. But a lot of times you can just go on a trail, you can go on a boardwalk, or you can just pull off the side of the road and get fantastic photographs. And I try to emphasize that to people that aren't as physically able to get out into the woods to photograph, that they can get lost in photography just along a roadside or a picnic area. I simply take pictures of nature. That's all I do to get people inspired. But it pales in comparison to what my wife does, which is she goes out and tries to save these sacred places, these special places. And that's what she's done her whole career. And I just don't think whatever I do I can hold a candle to what she's done. The battles she's fought with in Congress and on Capitol Hill, the legislation she's helped to pass to protect these special places. So as far as my photography, she's a strong influence, because what she fights for are the very same things I'm photographing. And where she tries to reach people through their minds, I try to reach them through their hearts. As far as an inspiration, you can't do any better than having a 2-year-old baby son that's very active and will get you excited about watching an earthworm on a sidewalk for 20 minutes. He has given me a newfound sense of life and energy and youthfulness. Some of my very special memories are not those things I've photographed. It hasn't been those things that I've experienced hiking a trail or climbing a summit or a ridgetop. It has been the people I've met here in West Virginia, which I knew ever since I was born here that were special, that were friendly, hardworking, and dedicated. But when I came back to work on the book project, everybody was very helpful. Always a smile, always a story. There's always mason jar stories that they had to share. And no matter who you are, no matter what your background, you're always welcome to come up and sit on the porch and sit and talk a little bit. I was traveling to Lost River State Park to photograph spring wildflowers. And I passed a couple fields of wild mustard, and it's beautiful in the spring. Just looks like the sun has just laid down gold on the meadows out there. And I saw this one particular field that kept capturing my attention. And I drove back and forth on the road because I wasn't sure who owned that field. And I saw this farmer. Eventually I saw this farmer on a tractor driving off the side of the road, and I followed him, and it turned out this guy owned that property. So I took a chance. I parked my vehicle, got out, and I introduced myself, said I was working on Book of West Virginia, and that I absolutely had to get a picture of that field. It's absolutely gorgeous. And he, without question, said, "Boy, you're more than welcome to. Just go down through this gate, travel this road for about a quarter mile. You might want to park off the side of the road and just walk all the way into the field. And by the way, leave the gates open." And the last thing he told me before I got out of my vehicle, he says, "And don't worry about the animals." Well, I didn't think much about that, so I got my equipment, started not jogging, but jaunting down the road. And I could feel something behind me after about 2 or 3 minutes, and I'm thinking nobody else was following me. And so I looked behind me, and I think this farmer's animals, every animal he had was following me. There were cows, horses, chickens, goats, and sheep, all following me. It's like Noah's Ark was right behind me. And the horses got so close that they were actually nudging me in the back. And a couple cows did the same thing. And I got to the place to photograph, and I actually couldn't photograph because I was nervous with all those farm animals, and they kept nudging me in the back. So I actually had to climb over the fence and take the picture so they wouldn't hit the tripod. I would encourage people that are interested in nature photography to mentor with a photographer, such as myself or someone else, to take one of their workshops, because what we can do is help you learn the shortcuts on how to take better pictures. The most challenging part of nature photography is not the technical aspects of determining shutter speeds and apertures, but it is trying to get that composition, that special image. How do you see a subject, see a landscape, see an image? And that's the most challenging. And what I encourage people to do when they start into nature photography is to learn all they can about the technical aspects the first year that they're into photography, and then spend your lifetime learning how to do compositions. Because that's the best part, that's the fun part, and that's the most challenging part of nature photography. One of my biggest joys in the last 26 years in photography is having the opportunity to take our young folks out and get them excited about nature through the use of photography. And I do workshops for an organization called the North American Nature Photography Association. One thing we do every year is we get 10 high school students from around the country, and we treat them like gold for a week, and we take them out to photograph some of the most beautiful places in the country. And they get to meet some of the world's best nature photographers and writers and editors and publishers. I met this fella from West Virginia, a young kid named Tyler Everett, who's from Paw Paw, West Virginia. This kid was born without a leg, handicapped, never stopped him from doing anything in life. He kayaks, he mountain bikes. The opportunity that I had to meet this fella and the opportunity he had to meet me, it was magic. This kid absolutely loved photography, but never had a chance to really get into it. And I started mentoring Tyler. And I took him to the workshop that we had with the North American Nature Photography Association. And this day, Tyler is 18 years old, and he's one of the country's best nature photographers. He's been published in national magazines. He travels around the country and photographs. His mother says, "I don't know what you did to him, Jim, but he sleeps with his cameras at night, and he always thanks me for what I did for him." And it's to the point now where I ask Tyler for help. He knows photography that well. And anytime we get a chance to go out and photograph, we do. When I was a kid, mountaintops and ridge lines we thought were made to climb. And when we were kids, we always thought that over the next ridge line or over the next mountaintop there would be some hidden treasure. And so as teenagers, and even as grade school kids, we would climb each and every mountain that we saw, thinking that over the next ridge line, over the next mountaintop would be that hidden treasure. And you know what we found was another ridge line and another mountaintop. And that never deterred us. It never discouraged us. The treasures were right there, and we didn't know it at the time. And what would we do? Well, we would sit there a little bit and look over the ridge and watch the turkey vultures or the red-tailed hawks soar, wishing that we could do the same thing. My concern now is that we're losing that very sense of place, that we're losing our ridge lines and our mountaintops. It breaks my heart to see West Virginia lose mountains, and it's happening in this state. As much as I photograph the beauty and the essence of Appalachia here in West Virginia, there's portions of the state that I wouldn't want people to see. I can't believe that we would actually take off the tops of mountains and put them in a valley and say that's okay. Where I lived in southern West Virginia, we did mining. It was shaft mining. Wasn't the most environmentally compatible way to mine either, but nothing in comparison to shearing off complete tops of mountains and saying that it's okay. So I guess one message I'd like to leave with folks is that people come to West Virginia to see the mountains. They come here to hike the ridge lines. They try to go over to the mountaintops, up to the mountaintops to find that treasure. And the treasures that they find are a stunning sunrise or a sunset, or fog-filled valley in the fall, or watching the birds migrate along the ridges. Those are the treasures that we're losing if we're not careful. And I hope it's in the wisdom, and I hope it's in the common sense of the people of West Virginia, including myself, I'm still a native son, to preserve these special places. I hope when people see my images, they come here and get just as inspired, that they leave with a smile on their face, and that they will want to come back. And that's probably the message that I'd like to leave.